Hello, hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Stacy from Pro Writing Aid. Thank you for joining us today. If you can see and hear me, please drop your name and location in the chat. Let's see where we're all coming from today. Arizona, okay.
Right. Arizona
London,
represent.
Georgia, Canada, Oregon. Oh, that's you.
That
Yes,
gotta
love
represent.
it.
Hello,
Texas, I'm in
Canada.
Texas too. I'm in Houston. Hello, Canada,
Seattle, right
California.
up there. Okay, not too far.
Netherlands. Oh, wow. Scotland. Very cool. Awesome. Well, we are an international bunch today. Seattle, Canada. Excellent. Well, again, thank you all so much for joining us today. Let's go ahead and get started. So we just have a few housekeeping items. First, you can access your Horror Writers Fest replays on the Hub page. The replays will be added as soon as they're done processing by Zoom. And they will also be posted to our community page for all members to view by November 1st. By attending Horror Writers Fest, you'll receive early access to Pro Writing Aid's biggest sale of the year. 50% off yearly and lifetime premium and premium pro plans. All participants will receive an email with more information by November 16th. If you don't receive your email by then, please just email hello@prowritingaid.com. If you'd like to keep the horror writing conversation going, we'd love to have you in our private online writing community. Joining is easy. Simply visit the link below and then log in with your Pro Writing Aid account information. Then you can hop on over to the live event chat to talk to other attendees. So we love hosting these writers events and would love to hear your feedback. We greatly appreciate you taking a moment to fill out the following type form. I'm going to copy and paste this link in our chat for us. One moment. All right. Yes, so please let us know what you've loved, what could be improved, and what you'd like to see at a future event. We'd also like to invite you to join a new free writing challenge in our community space. We'll be writing 5,000 words or more between November 4th through the 8th. It's open to all genres and all stages of writing. You can sign up. You can sign up for free using this link that I'm going to be adding to our chat as well. Okay. And just a few reminders for today. If you have a question for our speaker, please use the Q&A box, and you can find that button in the center of your Zoom screen. If you'd like to chat with other viewers, please use the chat. You'll need to select everyone, otherwise your messages will just come to us. Links to your offers from Pro Writing Aid and our speaker will be available in the chat and on the Horror Writers Fest Hub. So with that being said, I'd love to introduce you to our speaker today. Let me go ahead and stop sharing. Okay. Yes, so today we are joined by JB Kish. Hi, JB. JB is the co-chair of the Oregon Horror Writers Association and the winner of the 2020 Hooligan Press 2020 Hooligan Press Right to Publish Award for fiction. His writing has been featured in The Cozy Cosmic, Metaphorosis magazine's Best of 2020, 2022, Cosmic Horror Monthly, and Still of Winter, an anthology. When he's not writing, JB is a book coach that helps emerging writers design a strategy to reach their goals. He uses proven project management tools and techniques to help his clients finish their novels in 10 months or less. That is awesome. So JB, when you're ready, let's go ahead and begin.
Awesome. Stacey, thank you so much. Thank you to Pro Writing Aid for having me. And you're a champ because I probably have the resume with the most like odd alliteration and strangest award spellings and different publications that are hard to pronounce. So thank you very much. I appreciate you.
You're very welcome.
All right. And thank you everybody who joined. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now. And Stacey, will you let me know, is that showing up correctly?
Yes, you're good to go.
Awesome. I was running through the chat. Sounds like we've got folks joining from all over the world. That's really exciting. Thank you for being so generous with your time and coming today to hear what I've got to chat about. And so, as Stacey had talked about, what we're going to be talking about today is gore in horror fiction, or rather, what techniques can we leverage to help create a sense of fear without an over-reliance on gore. And that, I want to be clear, is not to pass judgment on anybody who loves their blood and their guts and their body horror. I love the gruesome just as much as the next author. And personally, I feel gore absolutely has a time and a place in horror. And in addition to some of the new techniques we're going to be talking about today, I'll spend a few minutes in our presentation talking about how we can sort of leverage gore more surgically, I guess pun intended there, so as to have a greater sense of impact, right? So that when we're using it, it's really landing hard with your audiences. But before we get started, I did want to quickly introduce myself. Stacey, thank you so much for the introduction as well. This is not my official author bio. However, this was my costume for several reading events this year, and I loved it so much that I decided to include it in today's presentation. Anybody who knows me knows that I love cosmic horror, the Cthulhu mythos, especially Shadow over Innsmouth, which inspired my costume here of, I guess, sort of a one-eyed kind of fisherman character. So as mentioned, I'm a horror and a weird fiction author. My first novel came out in 2017. I've been publishing short horror fiction for the last decade. My most recent one, I had a short story come out in Even Cozier Cosmic, which is an anthology, the second in its series. It's from Underland Press, and it celebrates cozy cosmic horror. It collects short stories that are meant to kind of give the reader a sense of dread, while also wanting to curl up next to a fire and welcome our impending doom and madness with a cozy blanket and a cup of tea. So kind of a really fun subgenre of horror that's taking place right now. I'm also, as mentioned, a book coach, a very specific type of book coach. And at the end of the presentation, I'll be talking about my company, writingmilestones.com. It's all about helping authors, as mentioned, publish their first novel once and for all in 10 months, using proven, tried and true project management methodologies and processes. So if you're interested in something like that, hang around. I'll be talking about it a little bit more at the end. All right, so let's keep on rolling here. As I mentioned, we want to talk about gore today, or what to do in the absence of it. And as I mentioned, I'm really not picking on gore at all. Rather, I chose this topic to explore with you all because I think it's a really important one, especially for folks that are newer in their careers and are starting to explore horror and horror fiction for the first time. So anytime that we enter into something brand new, and this is true for really any activity, we enter into that landscape with a toolbox, right, that is largely empty. And so naturally, what we start to do is reach for the lowest hanging fruit to get us started. And that initial fruit kind of becomes our first and our most regularly used tools. Now, when it comes to horror fiction, there is no easier fruit to grab for than gore. It's viscerally off-putting, it's scary, it's frightening, and it often involves sort of blood and guts and organs that should be on the inside of our bodies, suddenly being at times extracted and exposed to the outside elements. And, we know this is true because the moment we see blood, right, we know something's wrong. If we're seeing red, it means that some safety measure that should have been in place to protect us physically has failed. And there's fewer things more frightening than kind of coming face to face with someone or a situation that wants to impose that kind of physical harm on us or our characters. So gore absolutely works, and it is a tool for our toolbox. But I want to expand that toolbox today and talk about a few techniques that new or even experienced writers can start to reach for so they don't start to develop what I mentioned earlier, that over-reliance on Gore. And so here's what we're going to be talking about today. These three key things: psychological manipulation, uncanny imagery, and suggestive storytelling. I think there will be elements here that everybody's familiar with, but when we tie them all together, it sort of elevates us to a new mode of storytelling. So we'll dive into each of these one by one and start exploring horror from those different vantage points, which is also going to allow you to connect with your readers on deeper, more intimate levels so that those stories stick with them and continue to stir those emotions inside of them long after they've finished reading the story. That's the success of a good horror story. It's scary in the moment, but it's also scary at 2 a.m. when you get up to go to the bathroom and you can't help but think of that thing. That's when you really know that you've nailed it. There's this really famous Maya Angelou quote that I'm certain many people here are familiar with. I've learned that people will forget what you've said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Feelings stick with us the longest. And this is so true for the tools that we're going to be discussing today. And when looking for an example of a story to start us off that utilizes all three of these techniques in a way that sticks with us long after we've sort of seen it, there's no greater example, in my opinion, than The Exorcist. So when I personally think of The Exorcist, what I do not immediately think of, I don't think of this, are the gory details. I don't think of Regan, the main character, vomiting or her scars or sort of the pus coming out of her wounds. For me, when I think of The Exorcist, my mind immediately goes to this party scene on the screen, in which a group of adults have gathered to drink and sing songs. The scene is very jubilant, it's fun, it's relatable, and the pacing is really snappy, right? And then Regan, the little girl, the main character of the film, she comes downstairs in her nightgown unannounced. The adults all go quiet, and without prompting or context, Regan looks to a specific party guest, an astronaut that is soon going to be departing for a mission in space, and she softly says to him, "You're going to die up there." And this has stuck with me over the years because, well, personally, I'm terrified of flying. And this one line has done more to unravel me over the last couple decades than any amount of head spinning or demon voice or gore ever could. This simple moment for me is a masterclass in subtle horror, and it's nothing more than a single sentence of dialogue. So this is the impact of what you can do when you're very strategic and not leaning on that low-hanging fruit. Okay, so let's look at our first new tool for today, something The Exorcist used a lot of, that's psychological manipulation. What is it? Why does it work? In literature, psychological manipulation, it's a technique that writers will use to unsettle their readers by distorting characters' perceptions of reality or making them question what is true. It's about playing with the mind rather than relying on overt threats or physical scares. This technique keeps readers on edge, creating a sense of suspense and unease as they, along with their own characters, navigate a world where the reality and the emotions and even the memories might not be reliable. And here are three common techniques authors use in stories that leverage psychological manipulation. Unreliable narrator, probably something people are very familiar with on this call. The story's being told, but through a character whose perspective is distorted by sometimes mental distress or isolation or hidden motives. They're unclear to the reader, making them difficult to fully trust. There's also the technique of blurring reality and fantasy. That's where authors will mix dreams and fantasy or hallucinations with real events, creating a blurred line between reality and imagination. That heightens the suspense as well. And there's also sowing doubt and ambiguity. This is introduced by leaving certain details open to interpretation, making readers question what's real and keeping them invested in uncovering that truth all the way up to the end of the novel. So it's a great technique for sort of stringing your readers along, feeding them just a little bit at a time so that you really have a high impact at that climax. These are really common tools, not only in horror, but also you're probably familiar with mystery and suspense. These things are also used there because it's so immersive for readers, right? It's about pulling us in and putting us in their shoes as if it's happening to us. So really notable examples of this in literature and film, Fight Club, both the book and the film, Black Swan, for folks familiar with that, House of Leaves, and probably most notably in the image here, The Haunting of Hill House, Shirley Jackson. It's a perfect example because it explores the sort of devastating effects of isolation and blurred reality through the protagonist of that story, Eleanor. The author uses subtle and complex psychological techniques that play with the reader's perception, keeping them unsure all along the way about what's real, what's imagined. And it's what makes us feel so unsettled when we sort of consume that story. It's really easy to map this story to the techniques on the screen here. First, we've got Eleanor's deep emotional wounds and her need for self-preservation. They lead her to construct these alternate realities. And she even convinces herself that some of these things are real. And as a reader, we're trapped inside that perspective with her, right? We're experiencing that unease and unsureness about what's real or not. And it's made all the more complicated, obviously, if you're familiar with the story, as her growing attachment to Hill House increases, and the house itself kind of begins to sort of consume her on across a couple different dimensions or perspectives. Then, the ambiguity of her subjective experience leaves the readers with more questions than answers. It really intensifies that psychological impact because the author doesn't provide the strongest amount of closure for what's taken place. Instead, she allows us as readers to feel that same sort of cloudiness that Eleanor was experiencing through the story. And it kind of even leaves us with a sense at the end of the story, it suggests that we might not be any better than Eleanor herself in terms of our capabilities of coping. If we leave a story feeling like, I'm not quite sure what I read, and that was the perspective of the character as well, it forces one to ask themselves, am I the same? Could I be subjected to this same experience, which is just kind of like a fun meta way of scaring your readers. And I never thought I would actually say a fun meta way of scaring your readers, but there it is. If that was on your bingo card today, you can mark that one off. So this is tool number one for today, which we'll kind of explore in other ways, but psychological manipulation. Let's talk about my personal favorite for today, uncanny imagery. I love this stuff. So this is a technique in literature where familiar things are presented in a way that makes them seem eerie or unsettling or just not quite right. The term uncanny means something that is both recognizable and strange at the same time, which often creates that feeling of discomfort and fear. It's this sense of unease that creates a heightened experience for the readers when something familiar, like a doll or a reflection or even a person, looks or behaves just slightly off, right? And it taps into our lizard brains, that part of us that has fight or flight. Like when you meet somebody and you can't put your finger on it, but there's something that just kind of spooks you about them. Your brain is telling you that this situation or this person might be trying to take advantage of you, or worse, they might even be trying to harm you. That's the reason it's so effective, that part of that brain that sets off those alarms. So it's all about feeling that need to panic, but not being able to point why. That's why uncanny is really fun, because depending on the situation, you might not even be in a place where it's appropriate to point out why, even if you did know what it is. So Invasion of the Body Snatchers, great example where our main character starts to believe that the people around him might not be right, but they haven't taken over so much of the town that it would be socially acceptable to run around and start pointing fingers, right? That actually makes you look more like the crazy person. So there's a tipping point with uncanny that's really fun. Our main characters often sense something's wrong, but depending on the situation, the context, it might not be appropriate to say so. So here are some popular ways that uncanny shows up in literature. Objects with subtle inhuman traits. So, like I said earlier, dolls, mannequins, statues, great examples. Things with those kind of unblinking eyes that sort of seem to watch us and make them feel disturbingly alive. Reflections and doppelgangers. So any stories that leverage mirrors or body doubles that appear almost identical, but again, they're off. This is especially scary because in addition to hitting our sort of lizard brain, it also taps into our fears of identity and self-control. What does it mean if something like that happens to me? Now you're starting to connect with your readers on an entirely different level. There's layers to this sort of thing, and that's where again, Gore achieves a certain amount of layer, but if you start making your readers ask these other questions about themselves, now you're really starting to get to the root of things. Similarly, settings that resemble home but aren't quite right. These are spaces that mimic home but with subtly wrong details. A really, really great example. This is like one of my favorite things. The internet, we all agree the internet's sometimes not the best place, but sometimes the internet really creates some amazing things. The Backrooms, which is in the image shown here. Some of you might be familiar with it. The Backrooms is an internet horror kind of concept that shows up in YouTube videos, Reddit threads, or fan art. Essentially, it is, as a concept, this inescapable liminal space that feels kind of like an office complex, but it's subtly off. The ceiling tiles, the long yellow hallways, occasionally there's a desk or some paperwork strewn about. They're all familiar objects and things to us, but everything's wrong proportionally. There's no exits to this space. It just keeps going on maze-like. And our lizard brains immediately start telling us this place is a trick. This place is trying to be something else, but it's trying to trick us into going further. And certainly the further you go in the back rooms, the more danger you're probably bound to stumble upon. So if anybody's unfamiliar with it, that's a rabbit hole you could spend a lot of time in. And I highly encourage it because it's some people do some exciting stuff there. Another great example that folks will be familiar with in the world of uncanny imagery, Stepford Wives, classic, using the concept of the almost human replacements to create an atmosphere of eerie dread. In this novel, for those unfamiliar, the women of Stepford, who initially seem like average suburban wives, are slowly revealed to be artificial, robotic, and obedient versions of their former selves. Which continues to be, but especially for the time this book was published, was a social commentary, right? Still lands well today, but especially when it was published, really made people turn their heads. And this is where fiction gets really exciting, in my opinion, because Ira Levin, the author, was able to use uncanny imagery to explore some of the more important social topics in a way that resonated deeply with his audience. And I want everyone to really latch on to that. He was exploring women's struggles for individuality, autonomy, social paranoia, and it was a critique of gender roles. And in my mind, the big takeaway from this is that finding new and novel ways to scare your readers, it's not just about freaking them out with gory imagery, which is a great tool, but it's also about connecting with our readers on important topics, which is going to further cement your work in their minds and resonate with them long after they've read your story, right? So this right here, again, we'll revisit it, but this is tool number 2 for the day, uncanny imagery. And that takes us to our third new tool for the toolbox, suggestive storytelling. This is pretty much the exact opposite of Gore, and it's all about hinting at or implying or subtly suggesting things rather than stating them outright. It relies on implication and subtext, rather than explicit detail, encouraging readers to use their imaginations to fill the gap. So it's a bit of offloading of the work, which in certain times and places is a really handy trick. It can be particularly powerful in horror because the unknown is often scarier and more intriguing when it's left up to interpretation. Creates more suspense, and it can have a lingering effect. Again, that's the big theme here, is how do we linger in our readers' minds long after they've finished? So popular techniques for suggestive storytelling, ambiguous details, that's a very clear one right there. Events or descriptions that hint at something more, but don't fully explain it. Implied backstories for our characters, or even our places with sort of mysterious pasts that are hinted at, but not spelled out all the way for your readers. And then unseen threats. So characters that are sensing or reacting to something terrifying, but readers don't get the full picture. And one of the recent examples of this that I really enjoyed this year was Chuck Wendig's Black River Orchard. I don't think it came out this year. I think it came out last year, if I'm right. I'll need to double check that. But I read it this year, easily my favorite read of the year. For anyone unfamiliar with this story, in Black River Orchard, a small town becomes enthralled by this new breed of apple, which, quick pause, I think it's amazing that an author like Chuck said to himself, apples are about the least scary thing I could think of. He kind of did one of those like, hold my beers. If you don't think apples are scary, I'm going to find a way to make them scary. And so he does that in this book. These apples are impossibly delicious and have seemingly transformative health benefits. However, as the allure of this apple spreads, the residents of this small town become obsessed with it, and their cravings start to reveal dark secrets, not only about themselves, but about the town they live in and its sort of bloody history. The reason I love this book so much, there's a ton, but it's really perfect for this slide because of all the suggestive storytelling that takes place in this book. Chuck often describes the townsfolk as becoming better when they eat the apple. But early on in the novel, it's really not clear what he means by that. Like, are they physically better, mentally, socially better? We don't know, but one thing is very clear to the readers up front. Everybody in the book agrees that this apple makes you better. And it's this kind of unquestioning devotion to the apple that actually starts to slip into our last tool that we just talked about, uncanny doppelgangers, right? People that you know and trust who are insisting you just try a bite of this apple, man, just one, like it'll make you better. So really love that aspect. Additionally, he's really does a great job in this book at slowly teasing out character backstories. So some of the people that you meet at the beginning of your novel appear to sort of genuinely be good, honest, hardworking citizens of the small town, but a deeper backstory is always being hinted at. And by the end of the novel, some characters are revealed to be sort of something entirely different. And it's that tension that you feel throughout the novel, right? Meeting them that there's certain lines that feel off, and he pulls that taut throughout the entire book, which really makes the payoff pretty satisfying when you have a full comprehensive understanding of who this character was that you've just spent like 600 pages with. It's a thick book, very worth your time. Outside of literature and Black River Orchard, for this example, there's other great examples that folks are probably familiar with. Bird Box by Josh Mallerman. That story never fully describes the creatures that cause people to go mad. Readers only know that they are in the book and they are dangerous if they are seen. And it's that lack of description that builds suspense as, again, the author's offloading the work. It's not a tool to be abused, but again, when used intentionally, you don't have to do all that legwork. Simply implying that this thing is so grotesque or so terrifying, it literally breaks your brain. That, in my world, is a perfect example of offloading the work, because I, as a reader, am the only one who could tell you what that thing is so scary in my world that it could break my brain. There's no way Josh Mallerman would be able to describe, listen, gang, there's a lot of craziness happening up here, and Josh Mallerman would not be able to tell me what would break my brain. Only I have the power to do that. And he was so intentional and so smart by giving me permission as an audience member to do that. So great example there of offloading work to the reader. Similarly, the film Jaws, Great movie. And the monster is almost entirely suggested at throughout that entire film. It's not shown outright until the climax, but that threat is communicated in different ways. Because it's film, they've got the opportunity to use music, but characters' reactions, brief glimpses, all things that you could leverage within literature to do a similar thing. It lets that a reader build up in their mind what this monster is. It makes for an excellent payoff at the end. Okay, so we've spoken about those three new tools for our toolbox, but I want to talk about something important that is adjacent to those things and very related: atmosphere and pacing. So if we think of writing as cooking, then the tools we've explored, psychological manipulation, uncanny imagery, and suggestive storytelling, these are the main ingredients in this analogy of like writing as cooking. So these are our ingredients: spices, flavors. They create textures that give the dish, the book, a unique taste. Atmosphere and pacing are the cooking techniques, right? The timing. These things are essential for bringing out the best in the main ingredients. So let's talk a little bit about atmosphere. Atmosphere is a technique in writing used to create a powerful emotional setting that draws readers into the story and evokes specific feelings such as dread, tension, or mystery. So here's how each of these elements works and why they're effective in horror. So the first, sensory details. So we're talking sights and sounds and smells, textures, anything that engages your reader's senses, making a fictional environment feel real. This is critical in horror because when readers can feel a place, even in their imagination, the stakes become real. The vulnerability to the danger becomes real. Another sort of element, quiet, isolated settings. So quieter, more isolated settings that lack that sort of outside intervention. So we're talking places like deserted towns or lonely forests, empty homes, big buildings. These places often feel disconnected from safety and society. However, it is worth noting that isolation can be found in populated areas too, especially if you lean into psychological horror, that tool from earlier. That really allows you to isolate a character in broad daylight, take it out of the need for putting them in the middle of nowhere without cell service. That was horror of the past, right? That's very 80s horror. But these days, great examples of psychological populated horror stories. You've got It Follows, the movie It Follows, the movie Talk to Me, and the movie Smile. All three of those very much leaning into the idea that we can isolate our characters psychologically in populated areas and show them things that only they and the audience can see, which really cranks up the stakes. Because now it's like, hey, this could happen anywhere. I don't have to be on my way to the cabin in the woods without my cell phone to be at risk of being, I guess, murdered, to put it bluntly. And then lastly, specific word choices. This one's very obvious for us writers, right? The words we choose matter. We don't want to use cheap words. We want to use specific, strategic words, things that have connotations. So, darkness, decay, and quiet movement all have that connotation. So it's about intentionality for helping create atmosphere. Okay, the second thing around our sort of concept of the cooking analogy here, pacing. It's critical to building tension and making atmosphere that readers will remember. So this is how an author controls the speed at which events unfold, creating suspense and anticipation for the reader. And then by carefully managing that pace, they can feel that buildup over time, and you're using slower movements to develop that tension. And then suddenly you can use fast, sudden movements to release that tension in shocking or unexpected ways. So the two key elements for that are that first, that slow buildup, stretching out your scenes, your descriptions, or moments to make readers feel a growing sense of suspense and dread. We're not trying to trick them. We're trying to communicate clearly that this is intentionally being drawn out. It makes them feel the weight of each word that you're writing. And by delaying those events that they're just kind of like know are right around the corner, you're making them wait. Anytime we're put in a position where we're forced to wait, you're naturally increasing our curiosity, but you're also cranking up our anxiety as humans, right? So, great example of this, the film in the book Rosemary's Baby. The story builds slowly. Our protagonist, Rosemary, she begins to sense that something is not quite right, but the tension is rising in small little surgical ways, and her anxiety grows, making our anticipation grow alongside it. And then once you've done the slow buildup, then you can shift to a sudden shift or a climax. These are big disruptive moments where the pace shifts to being much faster, catching readers off guard, right? This is the sort of literary equivalent of the jump scare. We want to shock readers into releasing that pent-up suspension. And when we go back to the Rosemary's Baby example, when she starts to kind of uncover the horrible truth about her husband and her neighbors, those realizations, they happen very quickly, very shockingly. They disrupt the previous flow of the novel, which has been that slow build, and it intensifies the scares for people. Okay, so I want to quickly do a little bit of a case study where we see an example of some fiction writing that leverages this in a number of different things that we've talked about today. These are the opening lines from a short story published by Nightmare Magazine by a horror author named Eric Grove in 2023. And the reason that I love these opening lines, the reason I feel that this short story got published, was because it shows a very tight and controlled mastery of atmosphere and pacing, and psychological terror specifically, that new tool in our toolbox. So one could, if necessary, hide between the studs in your walls. Shoulders narrower than the gap, back against the plywood of the exterior panel, chest, when fully inflated with breath, pressing against the lath and the plaster, room enough to disappear. So, in this much longer story, the opening lines, we have three key things happening here, right? First, we've created atmosphere. It's the inside of a home. It's not like a living room. It's the space in between the walls, literally between the walls. It's cramped. It's claustrophobic. It's isolated. It's not where any good, decent person probably belongs. The second thing is the fact that it's not just any living room or home. It's your living room. It's your home. Now it's personal. Now we've tapped into the psychological. And the third thing I love about this is a playful, sort of suggestive and definitely sinister implication that the narrator, whoever they are, if they truly felt like it, could sort of simply slide into that space without you knowing. And that is an amazing use of another tool we've talked about, suggestive storytelling, right? You long to know from the first paragraph, all right, who's this guy? Why is he inside the inside of my house? And what does he plan to do while being there? So in terms of pacing, what the author has done is quickly suggest the threat of danger. But the story, if you take the time to go read it online, it's a long time before it fully explains what that danger is. And when it finally comes, the shift is sudden, like we just talked about in pacing. The danger intensifies very quickly. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip this next section here, but this is the next section in that short story. Again, an amazing use of suggestive storytelling, psychological storytelling. I will note one thing here. This was mine before it was yours, a single story 1920s bungalow. It goes on to describe the house a little bit more in great detail, in a scary amount of detail. Whoever this narrator is, they know our house very well. And this last line, your keeper puts his arms around your waist, his hand with the golden band on the outside. He asked if you liked it. Now, this is amazing because we've suddenly been jumped into the action of the story, right? This is a great example of a sudden shift in pacing. We go immediately from a haunting and beautiful description of the house into the action. So this is a great example of that shift from something beautiful to something scary, because we don't know where this person is or how they're watching us. Okay, because it's almost Halloween, and I imagine that everybody on this call loves their scary movies. Two films I want to recommend for folks if you haven't seen them, especially when it comes to pacing and atmosphere, are these Oddity and Mads. I'm not going to go into each film, but I'll say they both do an excellent job cranking the tension slowly and building an atmosphere that lasts with you long after you've seen it. Oddity actually has almost no gore in it at all, but the suggestive storytelling is terrifying. While Mads has an incredible amount of gore in it, but it uses the gore intentionally, not as a blunt object with which to hammer the audience. Which brings me to my next slide, which is like, okay, John, we get it. You want us to do everything but use gore, but darn it, I like gore. So what about it? When is it appropriate to use it? And how do I make sure I'm not using it as a crutch? So great, let's talk about gore. It's a totally fair question to be asked. In defense of gore, let's talk about when it hits the hardest. In my experience, once you've leveraged some of these other tools we've talked about today, then you can start leaning into it. And here are some great ways you can lean into it. The climax of a psychological horror story. When you use gore sparingly to break the tension and deliver a shocking, physical payoff after that psychological buildup. So in the image here, we've got that famous scene from The Shining. It's not quite the climax of the film, but a great example of the tension's been building psychologically. The elevator opens and we have personally a shocking amount of blood, way too much blood. Whoever's blood this belongs to, they need to get to a hospital quick. Other places where gore really hits hard, externalizing inner states. So gore can mirror a character's mental breakdown or despair, adding depth to the psychological journey. Also, contrasting the ordinary and the horrific. So introducing gore into a familiar setting creates a disturbing contrast. It really intensifies the scares for your readers. It's really great at emphasizing real stakes. A single graphic moment underlines the real danger, and it makes the story's threats feel tangible. So great examples where you might have seen this done masterfully are anytime you've seen a war film and you've got our characters who are hanging out in a non-violent sort of situation, talking to one another, that classic scene where suddenly a sniper bullet comes and takes out one of our characters, right? Emphasizing real stakes. And it's a single graphic moment that really brings it full circle and makes it round. And that hits differently when it is acute, when it's surgical, when it's fast, but upends everything that we know. Obviously, gore is great for highlighting mortality themes. It can underscore themes of decay or corruption is very popular, and it reinforces whatever your story's darker themes might be. And then, of course, as we've mentioned several times, building anticipation, hints of gore, like blood splatters on the wall or faint descriptions. A story that did this really, really well, another film example, the 1980s version of John Carpenter's The Thing, my favorite movie of all time. At the beginning of the film, they go to, I believe it's the Norwegians base, where clearly a story has taken place, but that's not our camp and we don't know what happened. But when the characters go there and they walk through, the building's been burned down in portions. There's blood in certain parts of it. There's an axe in the wall, all suggesting elements of horror that are raising the tension for our current characters who are trying to figure it out. And it's a clear signaling that if this happened to that other camp, it's definitely going to happen to yours. Okay, great. So before we go any further and wrap up, I'll pause here. Stacy, are there any questions that we want to get into before I sort of do a recap? Or should I go through the recap and we can get to the questions afterwards?
Let's go through the recap. Yeah, let's go through the recap.
That sounds great. Okay, thank you so much.
Mhm.
All right, so gang, here's what we've covered today. There are 3 new tools that we have added to our toolbox. Psychological manipulation. It's about unsettling your readers and distorting their perception. Remember, our example there was Haunting of Hill House. Eleanor's unreliable perspective, really making us feel like we don't know what's going on. Uncanny imagery, something that looks or feels human, but it's off. Example is the Stepford Wives, that social commentary that something like the uncanny helps you unlock and go a level deeper with your audience. And suggestive storytelling. Rather than showing every horrific detail, sort of suggesting what happens. That Black River Orchard example where you eat the apple and you become better, but what does that mean necessarily? And in order for those things to work, we've also discussed the importance of atmosphere and pacing. So sensory details and quiet settings. So that's the sights, the sounds, the smells that make something feel more immersive. And if it's more immersive, it's more real in your reader's mind. And then isolating your characters. And remember, isolation can be done in populated areas as well. And then also balancing slow builds with sudden shifts, right? Teasing out your story, controlling the rhythm, and then having sudden shocking moments. All right, so I want to leave you with just a few more concepts that we didn't talk about today, but you can definitely jot these down and go research them if you want. Other great tools that you can be adding to your toolbox: foreshadowing ominous symbols. This is from the opening of the film The Exorcist, which is a great example. That's something that you can give the readers to telegraph and start having them anticipate the safety of your main characters. There's also understated horror dialogue, so letting characters hint at fears or dark secrets through offhanded remarks. Using minimalist descriptions, less is sometimes more. Again, it's about offloading that work to your readers. Simple language can help disturbing moments feel more powerful and put an emphasis on those moments. And then also, of course, fragmented non-linear narratives, breaking that traditional chronology to mimic characters' disorientation or to be feeding stakes to the reader at different paces. Okay, so that is the majority of the presentation today. I really appreciate it for everyone for giving me your time. And before we do wrap up, I do want to talk a little bit about my book coaching, and then we'll grab some questions, Stacey, if that works well for you. Awesome. Perfect. Okay, so mentioned at the beginning, I do a specialized kind of book coaching. Pro Writing Aid has been kind enough to let me preview that for you all today. So essentially what I do, gang, is this. I help people finish their novels once and for all and achieve this milestone right here. If you've ever been scrolling on social media and you've seen someone get to unbox their very first novel for the first time and get to experience, the smell and sort of the touch and the feeling of getting to see their work come to life, that's what I do. I have a decade of experience in project management. And what I've done is apply these proven processes and project management tools to folks who are trying to write a book. I've used it for myself and I've used it for all my clients, and it works. So more importantly, they're able to finish their novels without sacrificing their day jobs, their family, or in my opinion, most importantly, their sleep. I'm especially serious about that sleep part because my secret here is not to tell people that they have to wake up at 4 a.m. to write their book or like whatever else hustle culture teaches us to do. That's not my vibe. I want you to be able to write your novels, finish it, and live your lives. Instead, it's really about breaking down your goals into incremental, actionable steps that we can put on an actual roadmap to track your progress. Really, it's about understanding that our books, our novels, are projects, just like the websites that I build as a project manager. And if we can build multi-million-dollar project roadmaps for building a website, I guarantee we can do it for your book and we can get it done confidently. So I want to thank everybody for joining. I'm offering a free clarity call for today's attendees. If you want to email me with the subject line, PWA referral at hello@jbkish, you're more than welcome to do so. I'd be happy to hop on a call and just chat with you about what your goals are. And if you want to learn more, you can check out my website, writingmilestones.com. There's lots of information about how me and my clients are able to do this. And with that, I'll stop moving my hands around so much. I'll stop talking. Stacey, thank you so much for your help. What questions can we start with?
Sure. Well, first of all, that was just absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for kind of taking us through that journey and also sharing about what you're offering. It sounds amazing. We do have a couple of questions. Let's see here. Oh, someone wanted to know in the beginning, could the hotel from The Shining be part of uncanny imagery?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, that's where uncanny also can, and that's funny because we later on had the Shining example, totally leans into it, specifically because if you know about the film, the book is really good about this, but the film especially, they set up the sets so that when you are seeing the characters walk through it, the windows don't make sense. They're on the interior of the building, but suddenly when they go into an office on the interior, there's a window behind the desk, which is physically impossible. So that was actually the filmmakers' subtle techniques of creating the uncanny, something that seems right, but like, how could that window actually be there? From the moment you start watching that film or reading the book, you're being introduced to that.
Awesome. Okay. What advice would you give uh what advice would you give with the level of fear and gore for children's horror, middle grade age?
Yeah, that's great. That's really good. There's a lot of approaches to this. I would start by watching R.L. Stein's Masterclass. R.L. Stein, who wrote the Goosebumps series, everybody's probably familiar with that. He came up in a different era. The stories he wrote wouldn't necessarily work today if he hadn't already established his brand, but he did early on in the 90s. So people know what to expect from him, and he's a powerhouse, and the man can't be stopped. I love him. I grew up on Goosebumps. But he has rules in his masterclass that you can learn about what level of gore is appropriate, what level of horror, psychologically especially. One of his rules is that the death is never shown on screen. It's always suggested, and there's never any divorces being explored in like his parents' situation. So he's got rules that have worked for him. Now, a lot of other authors these days think that kids these days, especially with Fortnite and all the TV and the screens, are exposed to this stuff way earlier, and that they actually can stand a little bit more of this gore. So there's other great children's authors. I would Google that and figure out who the top ones are. Check out what they're doing, because they are pushing the envelope a little bit. But starting with R.L. Stein is an amazing starting point, because you really can't go wrong. He will guide you in the right direction, and then you'll get to experiment from there, adding bits of gore to see what lands or what might be too far.
Ah, okay. I love that. Every year actually I end up watching Goosebumps even though I'm in my 30s, just good
Nothing wrong,
memories.
nothing wrong with that.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we have a question from the Creeper. Love that name. He asked, what is a masterful way to implement suggestive storytelling in a way that is both terrifying and subtle?
Yeah, that's great. There's so many good examples. The short story that we explored there by Eric Grove, I would check that out on nightmare.com. It's free. They post most of their stuff for free once it is published. And that's a great way where it's like the suggestion is in the implications of, if somebody can be in my home without me knowing it and making observations and have a more intimate understanding of my home than I do, then what you ask yourself as a reader is like, okay, well, what are all the ways they can take advantage of that? And I think that's the crux of what you're asking, is like writing situations where, again, you're offloading that work to your reader to ask themselves, what are all the ways this situation affects me personally, intimately, for the worse? And if you can start to zone into that, you've unlocked the ability to really just write suggestive things that are going to start scaring people. Probably everybody on this call would be terrified to learn that somebody might be living in the walls of their house. And you've offloaded the work of like, okay, well, if my wife's not here and I'm by myself and suddenly they decide to emerge, I can imagine some pretty horrific things that they would do. Now you can write a line about the knife on the counter going missing. And it's like, okay, so now there's a person in my house and they might have a knife. And it's really easy for me to connect the dots to all those insane things I've seen on TV. Now you can suggest the crazy things you've seen on TV. You don't even have to say those, but we've all seen horrific imagery. So you're hinting at it and you're just giving the people the seeds to plant it out. I hope that answers the question, but email me at this email if that doesn't quite nail it for you. I'd be happy to talk about that further.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Okay, this is from Winter. Let's see our time. Okay, great. How do you reconcile building things up slowly and potentially boring your reader? I'm always afraid that if I go too slow, it will be too boring.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And slow can be boring. And that's where you need to lean into elements of craft where you feel you might not be as strong. If your craft is firing on all cylinders, slow won't be boring for you. But ask yourself, why is this boring right now? And look at the elements of craft and see if you can identify where you might have a little bit of a weaker muscle. Dialogue is something that a lot of people feel they're really good at, but dialogue is actually really hard to nail, especially in horror, to speak in a way that feels natural, but is also succinct. So I would suggest that you look at examples of your craft first, and then you look at examples of, I would go to novellas. Tor.com has a bunch of horror novellas that they write. The example with the Stepford Wives is really great as well. What they do is they're working in a novella length. So they're allowed to be slow, but only for about 90 pages. And then things turn rapidly. So I would play with that word length if that's a struggle for you as well. Give yourself permission to not have to do a novel's worth of slow. Give yourself permission to write 90 pages worth, and then grow that muscle, identify those elements of craft, and suddenly you'll be able to put a novel together much faster. But play with word lengths. Novelettes and novellas are doing very well in horror right now. So if you're interested in getting started here, short story is the easiest. There's plenty of magazines that are publishing. And then novelettes, which are essentially like very long short stories, and then novellas, really short, really tight, 40,000 words. Probably everybody here could get that knocked out. Those are playing very well. Shorten the length you're working in.
Awesome. Yes, and get started in our
Right.
new writing challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Look at that. Cross promotion. Boom.
That's awesome. Okay, we'll do a few more. Let's see. What role does point of view play in crafting fear? Does
Yeah.
first person tend to work better over third?
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on the type of story you're telling. And for that, I won't even pretend to be an expert. It really comes down to your personal preference in the sort of story that you're trying to write. I will tell you this. Some of the most successful stories that I've read actually lean on tense over point of view. Present tense has an immediacy to it that feels more immersive. So right now, there's a lot of people publishing with present tense. So I would actually, not to not answer your question, but I would look at trying to write something in present tense and then feel out what point of view feels good. Third person's great because you don't have to live inside their heads, and you can do a lot more implying to the reader what they're feeling and reacting through action, through dialogue. First person's also great. You put ourselves inside the perspective, but if you're uncomfortable with interior monologue, for example, if that's not one of your craft strengths, there's going to be a lot of heavy lifting to do to make your audience feel the same sense of immediacy as your character, right? You're going to have to really lean into that. So I would say, as I'm coming full circle on my answer, third person's great because you can offload some of the work to the reader by not necessarily needing to live in your character's head. It's a lot easier to describe what fear looks like through physical body actions and dialogue, and then play with tense. Present tense has got an immediacy to it that really moves, especially in horror.
Awesome. Okay, what's the most difficult subgenre of horror you have worked in to write a beyond gore story? So what's the most difficult subgenre of horror you have worked in to write a beyond gore story?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Cozy Cosmic, most recently, I'll lean on that one right there because Cosmic Horror is great because it's about it's all psychological, right? Cosmic Horror, if you think of Lovecraft, it's all about being exposed to something so much bigger than us that it is indifferent to human existence. So if you think of Cthulhu, we've all heard that is an elder god. He's so big, his problems are so beyond us that people go mad realizing that we're not the center of the universe as humans, that we're just like ants to these people. That's fairly easy to write. But then if you're supposed to make it cozy, which again, cozy is a subgenre that is getting really popular across genre. Cozy romance, cozy fantasy, cozy horror. How do you write something that psychologically needs to break your characters while also making it feel like a nice, comforting hug to read? That's a fun challenge. I invite everybody to check that out. And Underland Press is the press that published two of these. There will be a third one that comes out. So check out Underland Press. They publish amazing books, and there will be a third one. And if that's an interesting challenge, you could write Cozy Cosmic.
Okay, and I actually have a follow-up question on that. Dudley wants to know what magazine or website would you recommend are good for publishing a first horror short story? So would you say the same or?
I would say start with Nightmare Magazine. Nightmare Magazine is hard to publish in. They are publishing the best of the best in the industry right now. So that is a good place to start understanding what is top tier. And then there's a number of other magazines in terms of like their own, they're not only looking to publish the prestige, which I can't cite here because there's too many. But if you email me at hello, I can send you a list that I've got a collection of magazines that I'd be happy to send out to folks. But start at the top to understand what the best looks like right now.
Excellent. Okay, we'll do just a couple more. This is from Alex. Can a story be too violent? How do you know when you have gone too far?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it's subjective. The thing about storytelling is like really, there's nobody who can tell you what type of story you can't. There's splatterpunk, there's bizarro, there's weird. These are all subgenres that tend to celebrate gore more than others. And there's a thriving community of people there that deserve to have stories told as much as any other genre. So I would say what dictates if you've gone too far is how big of an audience do you want? The harder you go, the more niche your audience becomes. I know a lot of authors that are very successful and they are very happy to publish to a niche of like bizarro sort of splatterpunk content. That's what they want to write. It's smaller than like the romance category and they're fine with that. So it comes down to what your goals as a writer are. And this clarity call that I've got up on the screen right here, that's number one stop for any conversation I have with anybody who wants to meet is let's talk about your goals, because a lot of people trick themselves into thinking they want to be the next New York Times best-selling author. But the question you just asked helps me narrow in with you. That might be a waste of your time. If you want to write gory stories, I can point you right to the community that wants to read them.
Love it. All right, we'll do one more. This is from Adam, and he says, "Hey JB, thanks so much. This is a great seminar. I recently saw Color Out of Space and really enjoyed it. What H.P. Lovecraft would you recommend to read or watch next?"
Oh man, that's really good. I love anything Shadow over Innsmouth. The Innsmouth is my favorite little corner of Lovecraft. I love fish people that might be evil. They seem normal, but maybe they've got gills. Dagon. Dagon is essentially that story. It's from the 80s. It's not particularly good, but I think that it is worth watching to celebrate Lovecraft and my personal favorite corner of the mythos.
Love that. And that actually reminds me of an old Goosebump story where the
Ah,
kid turned into a fish. I
love
love
it.
it. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, JB. This was absolutely amazing. We are just so happy that you got a chance to just spend your time with us. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I know in the chat, everyone is just thank you so much. This is so great. This is absolutely amazing. We are just ecstatic.
Awesome.
Okay. Yeah, so for
Having me.
everyone, as always, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just going to say thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. I love talking about this sort of stuff. Let me know if anybody has any additional questions.
Awesome. Great. Well, everyone, you can find the replay to this session and the rest of our sessions in the Horror Writers Fest Hub. You can find the links again in the chat. I posted those. And if you have any other questions, just let us know. I've also added JB's information. Let me go ahead and add that again because I see everyone is chatting with us again. Oh, I love this. This is so great. This is so, so great. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you all so much, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Have fun
you.
writing.
Yes, happy writing.